So not including compilations, Status Quo released 5 official albums in the 1990s. And in this video, I want to rank them by my personal preference. This is quite a unique thing, actually, because in previous decades, Quo pretty much released an album every year. So if you're doing a top 5, some are going to miss out. Obviously, with this one, because there's 5 albums, none of them miss out, but I'm sure that by the end of the video, someone is going to rage comment that that is not as high as it should be, or that is too high, that should be at the bottom. In fact, that shouldn't even be in the top 5. What on earth are they thinking doing a covers album in the first place? But yeah, I'm going to upset some people. But, you know, this is a bit of fun. I've seen other people do it, and don't worry, dear viewer, I will be doing my top 5 of the 70s and then later the 80s, maybe not in that order, at a later date. So have no fear. Don't worry. This is not the last Quo-related video, as the channel and the podcast will suggest. So at number 5, we have an effort from the early 90s, 1992. This is the official live album, Alive Quo, an album recorded in 2 different places in 2 different years. Recorded, in 1992 at Party in the Park at Sutton Park for Radio 1, except tracks 7, 8 and 9 recorded live at Wembley in December 1990. This album was the first live album that I picked up. I still don't own the 1970s live album on CD. I do on record. This one was my first exposure to hearing them, at this point in time anyway, as a live act. I remember I picked this up in France, actually, and the difference is the album starts with Whatever You Want, which of course is a different start, but with it being the kind of event that it wasn't kind of a traditional Quo concert. This is, there's going to be a difference, I think, in the set list. And maybe that's why they added extra tracks in. Just for length, I guess. But I think the talking point here is the 20-plus minute version of the Roadhouse medley, which was released as a single in a much shortened version. So this is a medley of Roadhouse Blues, sung by Rick, The Wanderer, Margarita Time, Living on an Island, Break the Rules, Something About You Baby I Like, The Price of Love, and then finishing off with the end of Roadhouse Blues. As a kid, it blew my socks off. And when I saw the actual live video that was also released around the same time as this, it did nothing to falter my enthusiasm. That to me is really the singing point, of this thing. That's the selling point of it to me. Hearing tracks like In the Army Now and Burning Bridges, Little Lady, Don't Drive My Car live at this point was really exciting, because the compilation that I got, Whatever You Want, the best of Status Quo, that came out around 97, 98, the first thing I ever got. Tracks like Burning Bridges and the aforementioned were songs that really stuck out to me. So to hear them in live interpretations was really exciting. And yeah, I'm going to address the elephant in the room. Caroline is much too fast, but it's a novelty, isn't it? Certainly one version. I mean, if you name a version of Caroline, they did thousands of concerts, you name a version of Caroline that kind of sticks out from the rest that's recorded, that is certainly up there, isn't it? Can we say a word about this artwork for a moment? Because this artwork has always intrigued me. So aside from Rossi and maybe Bowen, no one else really looks like themselves. I mean, I remember as a kid thinking, is that John Rhino Edwards or is that a stand-in? Is he photoshopped in? Like, what is it? It's really odd. It's supposed to kind of show, I think, a sweaty Quo gig, and I just love the way in which Rick's hair is kind of enveloping his face, if that's the right word. So the point where literally only his eyes and his mouth are visible, like the face shape just isn't there. It was always an intriguing cover to me. And like I say, only Rossi kind of looks like Rossi. So the next album to talk about is their album released in around 98, 99, Under the Influence. Yeah, this cover, they wanted that spoon fork thing, didn't they? This was what ended up happening because of the pub tour. And yeah, it's a bit naff, isn't it? Even though the back cover emphasizes they're a rock band, this kind of shows who the bankable people are, that we have to put them on the front and that it's just these two. It's album covers like this that emphasize wrongly that Status Quo were a double act. And I can tell you, as a fan of 25 plus years, I'm sure a fan of 40, 50, 60 years can tell you they are not a double act. They've been a rock band with several different lineup changes, and Rossi and Parfit, whenever they've had to promote the band, they've been the ones in the spotlight on TV shows and stuff. It isn't, it made sense at the time, but things like this I always thought was misleading. It's kind of fun, this pub sign thing, but, you know, it could have been better, couldn't it? But the album itself, actually the music on the album, was extremely strong. I mean, certainly after, for most fans, after Thirsty Work and the cover album, of which we're going to talk about in the next few minutes or so, this was a return to form that led to Heavy Traffic. I don't think you could have Heavy Traffic without this album. 20 Wild Horses is possibly one of the best songs that they've ever recorded. Certainly one of the best ones that Rossi's ever sung, along with Under the Influence. I mean, that intro that just says, we are a band, this is the style of music. It's a bit pub rocky at times, but we're here to stay, and it's a little bit more real. Shine On, obviously, great Rick track. Round and Round is a little bit by numbers. Little White Lies, another piece of difference. I've always loved Making Waves. I love the way that builds and kind of the band are on full throttle. Blessed Are the Meek, great country-esque song. Roll the Dice was always very fun to sing as a kid. I mean, I got this on my birthday one year, and I was certainly very pleased. Little Me and You, I've always loved that kind of Rick Parfitt's take on Cliff Richard, Elvis type stuff. You know, it's very light, but it's very pleasing. And Rick's vocal performance on that in particular is very different to a lot of stuff before and since, to be honest. It probably has more in common vocally with the stuff he was doing in the early 70s. You know, the stuff like All the Reasons, the way in which he's singing it. There is a cover version on here, Not Fade Away, Buddy Holly cover. It's okay, but it's just kind of them going through the motions on that before they blow everybody away with the very Quo-like The Way It Goes. I do like this album, but for me, in ranking these, it isn't just about whether I like listening to it, and I love listening to this album. It's also about the memories that are attached to it, and I just think that there are others that have a much larger, much larger amount of memories attached. Yeah, where would this be for you? I'm sure for most, it would certainly be near the top. Stop right now, I hear you cry, but I say no, don't stop. And if you think that was corny, I know a lot of people would agree that this album wasn't their finest moment. It's billed as the 30th anniversary album because by this point we're talking about 1965 as opposed to 62. And that kind of occurred after 85, certainly with the Butlins Minehead thing in the early 90s. This is a cover album. This cover, I always liked this as a kid. I always thought this was great because, again, they look like a band, but I think it could seem misleading as to what kind of band they are. I mean, some would say, oh, they look like a cabaret band. I kind of get why they're wearing suits because it's a celebration. You know, we're going to have like a formal dinner. I mean, obviously, for the Brit Awards a few years previously, when they got that Lifetime Achievement Award, they ripped off suits. Maybe that's where we're going here. Maybe that's kind of a reference to that. You know, but yeah, I always like the cover of that. Now, when Quo do covers, when they do them well, they put their own stamp on them. This particular album, most of the time, they put the stamp on them. Sometimes they put too much of a stamp on it, or they go too far out from what you would expect. But then it's very polished. We've got, you know, special guests on this album, which is great from a marketing point of view. Maddie Prior, apologies if pronounced incorrectly. The Beach Boys, obviously. Brian May. Tessa Niles is also on this album. I had the VHS of this album first, and it was one of the first chances for me to see Quo on screen. I'd seen them on a couple of TV shows, maybe Noel's House Party, but to see them in a live concert situation, obviously it was mimed, but, you know, 7, 8-year-old me didn't care because I was seeing these guys and seeing Rick Parfitt doing Proud Mary at the beginning of that concert was like, this is for me. Right? This guy's got presence. This guy is cool. I mean, he's wearing a suit, right? He's wearing a suit. This is supposed to be a really square moment, but the way in which he's delivering it, his delivery of that song, the arrangement, the backing singers, is like, this is really cool. And before you judge me, I was 7 or 8 years old, right? There's a lot of stuff on this album, a lot of production. But do you know what? If you're going to do a covers album, you might as well throw the kitchen sink at it. It's got the Beach Boys on it, for goodness sake. Fun, fun, fun. When you walk in the room, I can hear the grass grow, which to me always seemed really odd, you know. But then it's a track from the 60s, isn't it? So you never can tell. It was a Teenage Wedding, a Chuck Berry cover where Rick Parfitt appears to be playing the piano. Get Back, which, after hearing the bluesy kind of rootsiness of the Beatles original, it's kind of disappointing to hear such a built-up production. Safety Dance, strange choice, but it kind of works, doesn't it? Raining in My Heart with that Brian May solo. I mean, why not? Why not at this point? And those sessions gave us the Brian May version of FBI with Francis and Co. backing them. Don't Stop, Fleetwood Mac song, obviously. Sorrow, which arguably to me is the best track on here because Francis just sings it, and it's, you know, the delay on the voice and the production and everything. It's Quo, but it's not Quo, and it shows that Francis, at the height of his powers, has an extremely commercial feeling to his voice. Proud Mary, as I mentioned before, Lucille isn't quite as pumped up as it should be. It should be. We've already heard it on Anniversary Waltz. It's not quite there, is it? It's kind of plodding along, but maybe they wanted to do something else. Johnny and Mary, Get Out of Denver. Much too many words. They didn't learn from Cream of the Crop, did they? Future So Bright, Got to Wear Shades, All Around My Hat. Some lovely songs on there. Great versions. Some people love it. Some people hate it. I personally have a lot of memories that are very positive associated with it. So to me, it's not bad. It's quite good. That's Don't Stop. So we go into the final two, and we're going to talk about Thirsty Work. Now, to be honest, this and the top one would kind of shuffle from day to day, to be honest. Some days this would be first, other days the other one would be first. Today, as I'm doing this, as I'm filming this for you, this is my number 2. Again, very controversial. And yes, I had my album copy, which I got when I was like 8, signed by Jeff Rich. This was the first studio album I ever got. And it was signed by Jeff Rich last year at the Butlins convention. I mean, it made my life. It was so wonderful to shake his hand and essentially thank him, because I can't imagine there are many people who take Thirsty Work to be signed. I don't know. Maybe so. Maybe more popular than I'm thinking it is. But to me, hearing Quo at this point, I mean, I grew up in the 90s where it was very pop sensibility. You know, I'm growing up in a world surrounded by Billy Piper and Steps and S Club 7 and all the manufactured stuff. And then something like this comes along with the guitars are there, but we've got all these keyboards and stuff and very sounds that I'm familiar with. But then at the same time, because of my upbringing, I'm hearing older sort of country music and other bits and pieces. So all of that molds together and creates one of my favorite Quo albums of all time. You know, and there are some rockers on here, Queenie and Rude Awakening Time, even Going Nowhere and I Didn't Mean It have their rocky moments. Rocky as in rock music, not rocky as in but this album to me is about the songwriting. Yes, there are 16 songs on here. Not all of them suit the Quo mold, whatever that is. Not all of them are status quo, typical songs, but I think this is an incredibly musical album that is very interesting, with a lot of light and shade. Songs like Sorry and Tango and Lover of the Human Race, lovely melodies and lines and key changes, tempo changes, every change known to man. And then songs like Confidence that are interesting lyrically. Point of No Return, which in terms of harmony and harmonizing, very interesting. There are moments where all you hear is voices and harmony. How many Quo tracks can you say that when they strip all the instruments away and they're just letting the melody and the vocals do the talking? This is the album where that stuff happens, you know, and it's not a favorite by fans. It's not a favorite by the band, but to me, it is a favorite because, like I say, it's the first Quo studio album I ever heard in full. It's the first one I really like. I've got so many memories attached to this. This is such a great album from a pop and music standpoint. It's not my favorite Quo album overall. I've done a video recently in the last few years that said that On the Level was my favorite album, and it is. This is a brilliant album. It's underrated, and next year, I've already joked I'm going to do like a 40-part series about the making of this album. Don't worry, I probably won't, not unless you want me to. Let's talk about the front cover for a second. So it's a bottle on a beach. It's not necessarily the greatest. It's a little bit lazy, and I think it's in the same school of thought as Under the Influence, but they do get away with it, I think, because at this point, how do you promote this album when it isn't the most Quo-like thing? So number 1 in this list is obviously Rock Till You Drop, with this great cover on the front. I've always liked this, and although, yeah, it only shows Francis and Rick, I've always liked it. It's a nice photo. You know, it shows the friendship that they have. It shows that they're musically united. And actually, that classic Quo sound that you know that the two twin guitars is here, right? It's here. And of course, the band are shown in full on the back as well. It's a rock band again, you know? This is a rock album. The previous album, Perfect Remedy, was rock, but it peered towards pop and country. This is purely, I mean, it is what it says on the tin. It has a much more live feel to it, even though it's a tad processed in places, but the count-in makes it more natural on the tracks in which that is visible. The CD version has several bonus tracks on it, and yes, I am aware that Tommy is on it, and that does kind of go to its detriment, but personally, I prefer the Perfect Remedy version of Tommy. You're probably thinking, well, you shouldn't prefer any version, but no, I quite like it. I like that side of Quo myself. I like all sides of Quo, but this album, that version of 4,500 times, say no more, right? Like a zombie, all we really want to do, one-man band, which I once did a very long air guitar to, and it said, oh, I don't know which part you're doing. It's like, well, obviously I'm doing Rick Parfitt's part, because Rick on this album is rock solid. Can't give you more, which, yeah, it's a new version of the song from 1977. I think they improve on it. Yes, it's a little bit more processed and perhaps a bit more poppy in its arrangement with those keyboards higher up, but those keyboards are just accentuating more the piano from the original version, which is kind of buried in the mix on that version. Obviously, again, Let's Work Together, cover, Bring It On Home, cover, but let's not get, too bogged down in that. There are some great original tracks here that say Quo can still rock with the best of them. And the fact that this was released to promote and around the same time as that Guinness World Record breaking event where they played several concerts in one day, this is exactly, I mean, when they're trying to promote themselves in some ways as a live act and do something good for charity as a live act, the first thing you want is a great album that sounds like a live act, and that's the live sound. The drums are a bit processed and a bit gatey, it's a little bit 80s, but I think you can forgive them because the guitar sound on this is exceptional. I'd love for them to go back and maybe take some of that shine off. I'd be interested in hearing a much more kind of gutsy rendering of that audio. I'm sure it could be done. To me, Jeff Rich's drumming on this is exceptional. Rick is exceptional. Francis, obviously, some of the solos and bits and pieces, great stuff. I mean, just great songs, aren't they? Just a great album. And that's why it's my number one. This is an album I think I listen to quite a lot, and it goes from beginning to end, and I'm like, oh, I can't wait for more, Something like Nothing Comes Easy perhaps is kind of preempting what they do with Thirsty Work, but to me, I love it when they kind of change it around and start playing with tempos and different sections, because that's very much what they used to do back in the 70s. And this is definitely a return to their roots, even if just a tiny little bit polished up. So that is my top 5 Quo albums of the 90s. Do you agree with my selections? Are your choices in different places? Do let me know in the comments below. Please rate, comment, and subscribe so that I can do more of this content. And I am aware that Quo also released, Francis Rossi released a solo album in the mid-90s. I've already ranked his solo albums. Go and check it out. Bye-bye for now.